Well, we got confirmation from you folks that you can hear us. Great. I'm also curious, where are you guys logging in from? Where in the world are you?
We should say good evening, Sujin, for some people.
Right. Ryan, what are we seeing?
Let's see. India from Houston, Texas.
Bangkok, Bangalore, Mexico City.
Lima, Peru. Indiana. Bangkok.
Anyone from Asia? Oh, yeah, we got Bangkok.
Lagos, Nigeria.
Anyone from Europe?
Rio de Janeiro.
We got South America.
They're rolling in so fast, it's hard to keep track.
All right, well, exciting. We'll get started now. Thank you for joining us. This is Sujin Kwan. I'm the Managing Director for Full-Time MBA Admissions and the program, and I am joined by two of my colleagues on the Admissions Committee. I'm going to have them introduce themselves.
Good morning, or should I say good evening to many of you. My name is Michael Lippert. It's a pleasure to be on with you here today. This is my fourth year with the Ross Admissions team. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, but came to Ann Arbor for my undergrad education. I absolutely fell in love with this place, and my wife is a 2015 alum of the program. So excited to share some app tips and have a great conversation here today.
Yes, and good morning and good afternoon to everyone as well. I'm Brian Johnson, Associate Director of Admissions here at Ross. I've been here for 5 years, and I'm a proud Ross alum who came here after a career in corporate America, and really excited to talk to you about the ways that people have been successful in the application process.
So as I mentioned, my name is Sujin. I'm also a proud Ross alum. And we consider ourselves not just the gatekeepers, but also the brand managers. And so we're trying to keep our community as great as it's always been and continue to raise the bar on all of our outcomes. We're hoping that you will be part of our community in the coming year. And today we're going to share some tips and insights to help you do just that. Before we get into the app tips portion, I want to go through a little bit of background on the Ross MBA program. So you have information from us on what you might be interested in, as well as what you might want to mention in your essays or your interview. Okay. We'll talk about the Ross, we'll go over our FAQs and tips, and then we'll share some next steps for you all so you can be successful in the process. So a little background, our incoming class this past fall, class size was 423. You see the stats right there. It's our best class ever, and we're continuing to bring in really great students year after year, and we hope that you're part of it, of course. Some of our key differentiators. You probably have heard that we are very strong in experiential learning, hands-on learning, getting you into companies, working directly with customers, with money, with organizations, and not just sitting in class and discussing cases, which you will do too, but a lot of it is hands-on learning. We have a phrase here called Go Blue, Go Anywhere that relates to careers and your network, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And if you've done any homework on Ross or talked to students or alums, you will probably have heard about our very close-knit collaborative community, and so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Academics. You'll be going to school here for 2 years. The first year is entirely core. There's also room for electives as well, and math. And then the second year is entirely elective. So it's a choose your own adventure experience. You see that we're 9 of 10 specializations are ranked in the top 10. Why does this matter to you? Because you are learning from faculty who are doing cutting edge research in each of these areas, and they are highly regarded in their areas. You're going to be learning from the best. And then why does the 100 top 10 ranked grad programs at the University of Michigan matter to you? Because you will be able to take classes outside of Ross while you're an MBA student. It can be in an area of your interest, could be a dual degree, it could be a class, and then it could be something to supplement or complement what you are hoping to go into in business. For example, you could take a language class, or you could take a class in public policy, law, engineering, sustainability, etc. Hopefully you've heard of MAP, stands for Multidisciplinary Action Projects, and that takes place in the last quarter of your first year, 7 weeks full-time, no other classes. It is like a consulting engagement that you're working on with 4 to 5 other classmates. We had projects in 115 cities, 25 countries around the world. The thing that differentiates our experiential learning program, MAP, from other schools is that not only is it full-time, but everything is paid for by the company. So whether you're going to India or Mexico or Bangkok, the companies sponsor your travel and lodging there. Here's a partial list of past MAP sponsors. You can see that it really spans the range of from tech to CPG to gaming to the hospitality industry, Habitat for Humanity. So whatever your interest is, there is bound to be a project from a list of about 100 that we source each year for you to do a project with. Action-based learning, I talked about that. Whether you want to start a business, advise a business, invest in a business, or to lead a business, we've got courses and co-curricular activities for you to be able to do all of those things while you're a student at Ross. Here's a snapshot of our career outcomes for our graduating class last year. As you can see, our graduates go all over in terms of geography as well as industries. That's what we mean by go blue, go anywhere, that your opportunities are vast, and that if you're afraid that you're going to come to Ann Arbor, Michigan, you'll never get out of here, you couldn't be more wrong. People go to both coasts and outside of the U.S. And then we talked about the global network. We've got more than 500,000 living alumni around the world, which makes us the largest university alumni network in the world. But it's not just the size that matters, it's the Go Blue spirit and passion that you will find from every Michigan alum. No matter where you are in the world, our alums are so proud and so excited to be a part of this community. And if you reach out, you will find the same. Wanted to take a minute to talk about Alumni Advantage. So your MBA experience at Ross is not just about the 2 years of classes that you'll be taking. You're investing for life in the community as well as your education for life. So our executive education courses, you can take those throughout your life tuition free. So whether you are a year out, 5 years out, 10 years out, 20 years out, you can come back here or to some of our classes in Hong Kong that you will be able to take executive education classes for free. So let's get into the application. Some of the differentiators for our application, as you've probably found in starting the application, we only require one recommendation letter plus the common recommendation form. We've got a series of short answer essays. We're not looking for a lot of prose from you. And then we have something called the team exercise, which hopefully you're familiar with and we'll talk about shortly and answer questions about as well. Let's go through the frequently asked questions. One of the most frequently asked questions we get is, should I retake the GMAT or the GRE? I'm going to throw it out to Michael and Brian and see what they say to applicants.
Yeah, so first, what I would like to underscore is that we don't have a preference between GMAT and GRE. So take the test that works best for you. And in terms of whether you should retake the GMAT or GRE, we do say use your best judgment there. If you feel like through the process you've maxed your score on either one of those tests, then you can take some time to work on other aspects of the application. If you do feel like you have some room to grow, or you've consistently scored higher on like your practice tests, and really think you can do better, or you think that there's something that you can alter in your test prep to help you improve that score, absolutely you should retake it if you have the time to do so. So definitely use your best judgment, but really think about the fact that there are other aspects of the test, and if you pretty much score the score that you think is going to be your best, then we recommend that you look at other aspects of it.
So an applicant asked me last year, I got a 730, should I retake it? How would you answer that, Michael?
Yeah, so we do get asked that all the time, Sujan. I think it's in a vacuum, it's actually literally impossible for us to answer that question, right? Sujan will always say this, and she's laughing here right now, but it's when we say holistic review, we mean it. So there is no minimum score. There is no average, like that makes it more likely. I would take the information on our class profile and give you a sense of where you stand, right? So that we're really transparent about that information. And so if your test score sort of lands within the range or our average, that's a good sign. But I would accentuate Brian's point. If you feel like you can do better and you haven't maxed out, I'd probably give it at least one more shot, because you would take that score, and that might help for scholarship possibilities. So you sort of owe it to yourself to push yourself to do that. But one thing I'm really fond of saying when I'm on the road is there's never one thing that gets you into business school, and there's never one thing that keeps you out. And so in this case, 730 is great, but that's not going to get you in alone. We're going to really care about your work experience and what you would bring to our community, and we're going to talk about some of those things. But it's the same thing if your score is maybe a little bit lower than that. There's going to be a lot of other things in your application that we're going to be really excited about to read.
Is there a score that's too low?
I don't think there is. When we say there is a minimum score, I really believe that. But I think, this is a Brian line, so I should let him say it. But Brian sort of talks about how, you're bringing like a down payment to the application of sorts. So, right. So, what your strengths and your weaknesses are in your application. So maybe if your test score is a weakness, it really puts an emphasis on the rest of your application standing out, and be cognizant of that. I think being really self-aware makes your application stronger.
Yeah, and I do think, to Michael's earlier point, looking at that middle 80% on those test scores and the average for the GRE is something that you should really, you should really pay attention to. If you're way off of that average or that middle 80%, that lets you know kind of what additional you need to bring to the table. So we never say that there is a minimum, but be realistic when you look at those at the information that you have, and that'll give you an idea of how competitive you are in our application set.
Okay, I'm going to be a little risky here and throw this out to Michael. If you're an applicant from a very big pool that tends to have high GMAT scores, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think this is a situation where it's don't overthink things. I think it's really important to control the controllables in the process. So, I already see things rolling in right now in the question box. If my undergrad, class from this, class is a little bit lower, what does that mean? What do I do? That part's done. So I think it's really focusing on the things you can control in the rest of the process. Of course, if your region sort of overrepresented with high scores, then yes, there might be an emphasis on doing a little bit better, but it's all sort of part of a bigger part of the application. So don't overthink those things or spend too much time worrying about them. I think, working on the parts of your application you can control, and think about the things that do make you unique. Really we'll probably share this multiple times throughout the hour, but sharing pieces of your personality that are true to you is really something that we're going to value, and that's what we're going to be looking for.
Yeah, to underscore what Michael was saying, we do care about your achievements and your caliber and your academic potential, but we also care about what you will bring to the table, the unique perspectives, experiences. So it's not just about the score. We're looking at everything. Okay, when can I submit a new score? The deadline is January 2nd. Can they submit a new score after January 2nd?
Absolutely. So you can submit updates,
including
on your score, up until the time that we give you a decision on whether you're admitted or not. So we will say that you are required to submit a score by the deadline, but we will accept scores up until the point that we've given you a decision.
The sooner the better, because
Absolutely.
The decision release date, I wouldn't wait until the night before to tell us, because decisions will already be in the system.
Yeah.
So the sooner the better.
And then also, we use that score to make our interview invitations too. So you want to make sure that you do take it as early as possible, but we will accept scores up until the point that we make a decision.
Yeah, a couple of things that applicants might find interesting. First of all, I always get this question. There's not any bonus points or any helpful to submit your application early. We wait until all the applications come in and review them all at once. So don't worry right now about, oh my gosh, I should work over Thanksgiving to get this application in. We're not going to open a single application until about January 9th or so. So take all that time you need. And then in January, there are going to be 2 waves of interview invitations. It takes a while for us to go through all the applications that are submitted. So it will be 2 waves. And so you probably have a couple of weeks there in January to get a new test score in, but it's a tricky sort of risky thing to do, because we might review your application at any point in January. So I would really try to have a test score in by early to mid-January at the absolute latest if you want it to be influential for interview invitation.
Okay. How do we define fit? Brian, what do you say?
So that's a great question. Really, fit speaks to a number of things, actually. So really, it's around what do you value? Do you value things that we value? One thing that I often say is that a good roster is someone who cares about something bigger than themselves, or someone who doesn't mind to be asked for a favor, or to spend some time doing something that doesn't directly benefit them, or someone that really, values team. So those are the kind of things. But then also, we're looking at what you want to do long term too, and how clear you're able to articulate what that is. If your long term or short term career goal is not within kind of our purview, or it's not a goal that we're very successful at helping you to get to, then, that might be a misalignment in fit too. So I think sometimes when I say that, people are afraid and they say, well, maybe I won't tell you what I want to do. And one thing that we would say is, in this whole process, it's best for you to be honest about what your goals are. The MBA isn't just about getting a credential. It's about making a pivot in your life, or really putting yourself on a trajectory where you can meet that goal that you want to meet. So put it out there to us and to other schools too, because if we're not able to help you get to that goal, and we say, hey, we're not going to admit you, then that actually helps you in the process. You're not wasting your time going to a school that's not going to help you get to that goal. So fit it usually has more to do with your values and that type of thing. But there is a small component there that has to do with what your career goal is too.
Yeah, I'll add a couple that I was sharing in New York last week at a big event, because I know it's top of mind. So one thing for us is we're an incredibly immersive MBA program where I think our students really put a lot of emphasis, not just on going to class and getting a great job, because a lot of MBA programs can probably do that for you. But at Ross, I think there's a third bucket of skill development and leadership development that is really important for our students, and they push themselves out of their comfort zone to get that. And a lot of it's student driven. So our professional clubs, we have the Data Insight Analytics Club. All these clubs are they're MBA second year students who are taking the time to create a special event or a case competition, or bring a speaker on campus. And so this might be a long-winded way of saying we really value, when we say community in our culture, it's doers. There's sort of an action bias at Ross. So if you have a history of a community that you've really influenced, whether it was your undergrad school or something in your personal life or a nonprofit organization, we'd love to hear that story, because it really gives us confidence that you're going to come to Ross and do that here. And I think it's a really good fit with what makes us who we are. The one thing I'll point out, I think we talked about in the summer too, is sometimes we don't see enough resiliency or grit in an application. I think it's okay sometimes to say, I had this mistake and I learned from it, and that's great. An MBA program, you're going to fail a couple of times, and it's meant to get you out of your comfort zone. So if you're okay with that's a really good sign with us too. So don't be shy about sharing some of that as well.
Should I do the team exercise? Absolutely. If you can, we would love for you to come here or to one of our international locations, three of them in round 2. Why should you do it? Because it gives you one more opportunity to demonstrate your fit with us. In addition, it gives you an opportunity to connect with potential classmates who may be at Ross with you next year. So it's a win-win. Will you be hurt if you don't participate? Absolutely not. But if you have the opportunity and the time to join us for that, I highly encourage it.
Yeah, a couple of, just real quick, because I'm seeing questions already. The team exercise is by invitation only. So it's like an interview invitation. It's part of our interview process. And the team exercise is only hosted either on campus or in Shanghai, Tokyo, and Sao Paulo in round 2. The 3 international locations tend to be hosted in early February or so. So Sujin will probably announce those dates on her blog in a little bit, or before interview invitations are released, but keep an eye out for those if it's really important for you to participate.
And we do see people from different countries flying to another country, not just to campus, to do these. So if you can, we highly encourage you doing that. Okay. Are there any questions related to these topics that have come through the chat that we should address?
One thing that I think came through that I saw that we've all been talking about internally is the GMAT or the GRE. It seems like we tell people we accept either, but somehow people are worried that there's something behind that, or how do we look at it? Maybe we should touch on that if we have a preference or what it looks like in our application pool right now.
We say we have no preference, and we mean we have no preference. Both of them have a verbal and a quantitative section, and we're looking at scores for both sections. We want to see different types of scores based on your background. For example, if you had a ton of quant in undergrad, maybe you majored in econ, and or you work in a quantitative field right now, if your quant score is a little bit lower, we're going to have less worry about your ability to do the quant in an MBA program. If you don't have strong verbal skills, let's say you're from outside of the U.S., English is not your first language, guess what? We're going to look very closely at your verbal score, because so much of what you're going to do in the MBA program requires communication and speaking and writing. And so we want to be sure that you have those skills before we admit you. Whether you do it through the GMAT or the GRE, we truly are agnostic. But depending on your background, that's where you should think about what should each sub-score look like.
Right, and I think, I'd like to underscore a point that Sujin made there. I mean, this, your undergraduate grades and your standardized test scores are really helping us get the sense for whether you can handle the academic rigor. So between those two factors and your work experience, that's how you're able to really show us that you can handle the analytic rigor, number one, which is really important because, we just finished our first quarter, and as we're going into the second quarter, our MBA ones really understand how difficult that first quarter is in terms of the quant. So we're trying to set you up for success by making sure that you have the background walking in to be able to be successful. So, if you are a little bit lower on your quant scores, make sure that you're using that optional essay to tell us other reasons why you may be able to handle that rigor too. So, and we may talk about that a little bit.
So people often ask, should I take a math class? Should I take econ or stats or calculus? And we say no. There are some schools that would say yes. That demonstrates that you can do it. We really want to see it through the standardized test, or through a class in undergrad, The classes may be helpful for you before you start the MBA program, but for admissions purposes, we really want to see it through the standardized test.
Yeah, and I would just say there's a lot of questions about converting the GRE or not. Because the number of GREs in our class, the size and proportion got larger, which by the way should be an indicator of how willing we are to accept it. I think it's one of the highest of any top 10 MBA program. We also posted the average GREs in last year's class, so that should be able to give you a guide of some of the things we're looking for. A couple other things that are coming through in terms of admission, very tactical admission stuff. One, I'll take in that our scholarship process is exactly the same as round one, and in some ways even better. What do I mean by that is we know more applicants apply in round two, and so we actually save a larger part of the scholarship budget for round two as well. A couple of things about the Ross scholarship process that I think is really helpful is that you find out the day you're admitted what your financial aid and scholarship situation is. Other schools, sometimes you have to apply after admission and you're not able to make an apples to apples decision. We try to be as transparent as possible so you know what your situation is right away. The second thing I'll add is there's no separate application. We simply just take the best applications and scholarship from there. So that should be pretty comforting that you don't have to worry about anything in addition to that. So don't worry about that.
Michael, are scholarships based on a test score?
No, scholarships are based on the entire application. So, we look at that part of the process just as holistically as everything else. I would say, if you think you could do better on the test, it may help on that front, but we're looking at applicants on the whole, and that's part of our strategy is, there are many things we're looking for in a scholarship student.
Okay. So the team has been reviewing round one applications for the last few weeks, and so they want to share some of the things that they've been seeing so that they can help you submit a stronger application in round two.
Yeah, I'll start with a one that's really, really important to me about the essays. So for those of you, as a little bit of context, we recently changed our short essay prompts to have multiple prompts to give us more avenues of hearing about things that matter to you and some of your values. And so hopefully you've been enjoying those prompts. I know I've seen a couple of questions come in, by the way, about word count or using the prompt. Does that count as some of the words? If it's 102 words, we're going to be okay with that, or you could change tense. But the larger point here is, when we're deciding who to interview, it's really tough decisions, and we simply don't have all that many data points to learn about who you are as a person and what you value. And so the essay should be a real opportunity to showcase some of it, about who you are in an authentic way, and tell us a little bit more about yourself. It should be a sort of an invitation to say, make me want to talk to you more, right? And so conveying that. And I think Brian and I are always talking to each other. We're reading a lot of essays about your work accomplishments, and those are important too, and we're excited about them, but we're going to spend a lot of time reviewing your resume. We're going to hear from your recommender. You're going to tell work stories all throughout your interview for 30 or 40 minutes. Don't miss the opportunity in some of the short answer essays to tell us a little bit about who you are. That's just as important to us as the rest of the application. And so it's using the real estate wisely. And we're going to hear about your work accomplishments in other areas. So that's a big one for me.
And I'll just add on to that. I often say that your essay should be your representative before you walk into the building. So Michael's point about using that to make us want to learn more about you, I think that's a great point. So if we don't know anything about you as a person throughout the rest of the application, and you use that section to tell us more about things that we already know, such as your work experience or your academic accomplishments, you really are leaving it up to fewer data points to let us know who you are. So definitely see that as kind of your representative that makes us want to talk to you a little bit more.
What are you seeing in the rec letters?
Yeah, so oftentimes we'll have people that ask us, well, who should that rec letter come from? Should it come from my CEO, or should it come from my manager? Should it come from maybe you moved into a new position 3 months ago, and your new manager doesn't know a lot about you, so should it come from that previous manager? It should really come from the person that knows you the best and who can really speak to your professional ability. And so one of the things that we see a little bit too often is rec letters that are positive but don't really give us a lot of information that we can use to determine what your professional ability is. So in those rec letters, that recommender should be able to speak to a project that you've worked on, speak to how you perform relative to other people in your organization. Sometimes that really short rec that says, hey, Michael is an incredible person who's the best employee that I've ever had. It's a good recommendation, but it's not giving us exactly what we need. So you want to make sure as you're talking to that recommender that you ask them to mention some of the actual projects that you've done, or give us more context around your professional ability.
We're trying to get a picture in our minds of what kind of person will you be in our community? How do you see yourself? How do others see you? And then if you're invited to interview, how do people in our community see you? So all of this is to create this mental image. Now, if you come to campus, we're going to see you in person, but we're really trying to create, put all the pieces together so we get a picture of you as an entire person.
One very tactical thing, because I saw it a few times in round one, a missing recommendation is by far the most likely reason to hold up an application from getting a decision in the round you've submitted it in. And this is even more of an issue historically in round two, because it's right after the holidays. So, and by the way, somebody who's writing a recommendation letter for you on New Year's Eve is probably not going to be all that detailed or overly thoughtful about that recommendation. So I would just, encourage you now. This is something you can start now. Put in your recommender's information. Give them reminders along the way. You really don't want to back up too closely to the deadline, because it's something that's a little bit outside of your control that you can hit submit on, January 7th. So take the steps to ensure that your recommender is going to be on time, and also take the time to thank them. Recommendations take a while to write.
What if my recommender isn't a native English speaker? Is that going to hurt me in the process?
Yeah, we won't judge you on your recommender's or command of the English language. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. The biggest thing is that recommender is able to speak to your professional ability, and we're used to reading recommendations from all over the world. So we tend to be able to tease out the information that we need on those.
One of the things I'll say about the resume is it's really important to us, and I think a lot of applicants overlook that is equally important, if not more important, than the essays or the rec letter, because it's giving us the snapshot of who you are, where you've been, and the choices that you've made. And then it creates the starting point for your one-on-one interview with one of our students or our alumni. That's all they're going to see. So you want to tell a pretty complete picture for them to start from, and then they'll ask you questions related to what's on your resume. One of the things that we do encourage and we like to see is having something at the bottom to talk about what your interests are and interests and skills, particularly the interests though, because it humanizes you too. You're not just someone who works for a living, you're also someone who does stuff outside of work. So we want to get a sense of you, like we said, not just through the essays, but also through your resume, who you are as a whole.
Yeah, this is a super inside tip. One thing that I like in the resume too is my first impression seeing someone across the room. So if the resume is really neat, like just from a visual standpoint, it's like, wow, like it puts you in a frame of mind, like, oh goodness, I'm really excited about reading this resume. If the resume is cluttered or it's very difficult to find, where the dates are, where you started positions, where you finished positions, and that type of thing, it really kind of starts to reflect on you as well. So one thing that I would recommend around that resume is you can search for MBA resume templates and look at what a standard MBA resume looks like. That's going to really help to give you a sense for what that should look like. We usually tell you that we want a one-page resume. That doesn't mean that we want one page at 6-point font. We want to be able. We don't want that to look too cluttered. So use that page very wisely. Sujin mentioned that we want to hear about your interests. And some people might say, well, if I put my interest on, it's gonna go to a second page. Can I go to a second page? And we really would rather you stay at that one page. But think about that one page as being a way for you to give us the most potent representative of yourself. So you're cutting all the fluff. You're making sure that all your strongest points are featured, and that's like a feature page. So a lot of times I say I would get excited about a one-page resume. I don't have to put the things that don't matter. The other piece around your resume, sometimes people will ask, well, I work for a company that isn't a household name and people don't understand what it is. It's okay for you to put a small line under that company name that says, it does this. This is the size of the company. But at the same time, we have a lot of exposure to different companies, so you'd be surprised at the different companies that we know. And then the other piece is, don't spend a ton of time giving us your actual duties. You want to focus on where you've had impact, and that's going to be a better resume than someone that uses 3 bullet points to talk about 3 different duties and never reflects any impact.
Yeah, I would just emphasize, Brian touched on it, but we're still seeing a lot of job descriptions. I always sort of just cringe a little when I see an applicant tell us they know how to use Excel and Adobe. It's sort of that might be something you need to do in a certain field or something you would talk about in a specific job interview. But for an MBA resume, we're really looking to see the quality of your impacts overall. I always use the idea. We know what bankers or consultants do on most days of their job, but we want to know why you're the best banker or consultant in your team or division. And that should help you frame some of your accomplishments a little bit. One other thing I've seen a lot of in resumes, if you're struggling to maybe cut space or trying to figure out how to fit it on one page, I always tell applicants, I think it's funny that there's almost this unwritten rule that each job you've ever had takes up the same amount of space on your resume, and it doesn't really make sense, right? It's not very practical because over time, your job responsibilities and the scope of your work's really increased, and we're probably most excited and most interested in what you're doing now and some of your latest work where it's a little bit more of a meatier role and you're accomplishing a whole lot. Maybe that first job out of undergrad is not quite as exciting, so you can sort of distribute space a little bit that way throughout your resume, that might help you get shortened up to one page.
Great advice. Okay, next steps for you to be successful in the process. We encourage you to register for future webinars. We've got a lot of them coming up, and we've got a lot of them that have already happened around different industries, different centers and institutes, career goals. So tune into those. Over the holiday break, we're going to have students who are going back to their home countries or around the U.S. They're going to be hosting coffee chats. So it's your opportunity to connect with the student in person. We encourage you to look for that. And then if you haven't already, I encourage you to contact a student ambassador. They are on our website. Brian or Michael will post the link. You can filter by geography, career interests, a variety of things, so that you can find someone who is either coming from where you're coming from or doing what you eventually want to do. And then you can ask questions about your interest areas specifically. So now we're going to move on to your questions, and I think there are a lot of them that have come through.
There are a ton.
Okay.
One thing about the last slide, because one of the questions I was going to throw out to the group, but we're getting some questions about how do I express interest in Ross if I haven't visited. And I think everything on this slide is a perfect way of doing so. So don't stress too much about actually physically visiting. We think if you're applying, you're interested, right? And you can also, virtual interactions really matter. So don't worry too much. We know it's expensive and also a busy time of year with the holidays in the U.S. So don't worry too much about that. If you do want to visit, there are a couple of visit days the rest of the year in late November and early December, but don't let that deter you from applying.
Okay. All right, so let's get to your questions. What do we got, Brian, Michael?
Yeah. I heard a lot of questions from reapplicants. And so I think, we should maybe spend a minute or two. If you're a reapplicant, what should you be thinking about? What are the kinds of things we're looking at when we see a reapplicant?
Well, hopefully you've taken a look at your last application and you've thought about where might the gap have been. It could have been in your work experience. It could have been in your test score. There's nothing you can do about your undergrad record, so forget that piece. Or maybe you selected a recommender who wasn't going to be your best advocate. So you should review that on your own. We don't give feedback to applicants about their applications. And then think about, how am I different now? How can I shore up that gap? Whether it's retaking the test, getting a different recommender, talking about your new accomplishments professionally, all of those are things that can help you in this year's process. And we have a lot of reapplicants who are admitted each year. So there's a great chance, and we love that you continue to be interested. There is no negative to being a reapplicant in our process.
Awesome. We're getting lots of questions, just as a follow-up to one of our last points with tips from round one. One thing is we definitely encourage you to include some interests or other activities on your resume. Again, it's similar to the essays. It's a way to learn more about you and who you value. So I wouldn't make that the focus of your resume by any means, but we definitely welcome a couple of lines to share some of that. We do take a close look at that. Again, it's another indicator that you would be really involved in our community. The last thing I'll mention is our interviews are what you would call semi-blind. So the person interviewing you has only seen your resume. So if you have an activity or experience that you really want to reference in your interview, or it might be a good way to connect, the only way we'll know your interviewer will know about it is if you put it in your resume. So I definitely encourage you to do that. What about career switchers? We've gotten a lot of questions from folks who are thinking about a big career switch, and they're wondering, how do they explain that in their application? What are we looking for? And, maybe we should talk more about the career essay specifically, because I think that's a big opportunity for people to talk about a career switch.
Yep, absolutely. So the career essay is really your opportunity to not only tell us what you want to do post-MBA, but also how you plan to do it. So when you're thinking of career switching, and also another thing that came up is your years of work experience, right? And I think this kind of is part of this. We really want you to understand, what you bring to the table before you come to the MBA, where you want to go, and how the MBA is going to help you get there. So you're in that career essay, you should be able to talk about some skills that you've actually acquired already, where you want to go, and then, what the MBA is going to do to help you. So if you want to talk about, a network, or maybe it's specific classes, or maybe it's, specific information that you need to get to that next level, that's what we're looking for. So we do want that to be clear as well. We don't require you to sign in blood that you're going to be a consultant because you say you want to be a consultant in the essay. But what that does illustrate for us, or demonstrate for us, is that you have done your research. You do have a realistic view of where you can go going forward, because what you're going to have to do in the MBA is do that again. You'll have another time to kind of do your due diligence. So if you've shown us that you've done it once, you can do it again. And so even if you don't end up at the same place that you say you want to be in the application, you've demonstrated that you can do your research. So that's kind of the career essay. Other piece that I'll mention is that why we want you to be clear is because when you get to campus, there is a lot going on. There are a lot of companies from a lot of industries that are working hard to really make you like their company. So you'll find that you'll come to campus right away and everything sounds great. It's supposed to sound great. That career essay and that career plan that you come into on day one can often be your barometer, the thing that you prioritize against. So when you have too much to do in a day, you look back at why you came to business school, and that's how you prioritize. If it doesn't link to that main goal, then maybe that's something you want to deprioritize.
The thing that I like seeing in the career essay is why you want to do what you want to do. It kind of gives us more insight into you. What about that short-term career goal really interests you? So that's another way to demonstrate who you are.
Sujin, this is something I know we've all talked about as a team back in May, but we took out why Ross from that question, and that upsets people because it's like so many other schools ask why blank, and so we care why Ross too, right? Like when can applicants talk about that, or why did we do that? I think we've gotten a few questions, so I think it's interesting.
So we took it out because applicants would cut and paste information from our website about who we are, and we already know who we are. We don't want you to waste your precious word count on telling us who we are. You do have the opportunity to tell us why Ross if you're invited to interview. That's when members of our community, whether it's a second-year MBA student or it's an alum, is going to ask you that question: why MBA, why Ross? Because there are so many schools that can get you to where you want to go. That's when they're going to care that we matter to you for these reasons. So you still need to answer that question, but it will be at a different time in the application process.
Great. I hope that provides some clarity, because I know a lot of people are nervous about that section. What about, we're getting a lot of questions about language requirements, and I know they differ a little bit based on region, but Brian, do you mind going over like a quick overview of what we're looking for with that, and like sort of how our rules, so to speak, about language?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that I'll mention, because I see a question around international scores and do they convert to a 4-point scale, we're used to reading applications from different countries, so you don't have to worry about converting. We have a good idea. We will look at your TOEFL scores if you attended a school that wasn't taught in English. So we're going to definitely focus on that to get a sense for your ability to speak English. And then also, again, if those scores are a little bit lower, that's something that you want to address in that optional essay as well.
Yeah, we generally recommend a score of over 100. It's not necessarily a minimum, but it's something we would recommend. What about, Brian, you just mentioned the optional essay, and we haven't talked, and I emphasize optional. Yeah. I often say it's not an optional essay, it's optional bullet points. But what's a good use of the optional essay compared to something that might make us a little more, question judgment, so to speak?
Okay, so I'll answer the last question first. We question your judgment when it's obvious that you've cut and pasted another essay from another school into that. that space. So the optional essay specifically should be used to clear up any possible misconceptions or any gaps from the application. So if you have a gap in your resume that's over a couple months, you want to very briefly explain, why that gap occurred. You don't have to explain to us about why the recession happened and you weren't, you were laid off. We understand that there was a recession. You can just say, I was laid off from this job and I picked up another job later. That's fine. It doesn't have to be really deep in detail. We don't want you to put, the answer to a question that you wish that we'd asked you. That's another thing. We're asking you the questions that we want the answers to, and so you don't want to put that into that optional essay.
It is not the place to do your why Ross essay.
Right, that either.
Yeah. Sujan, what about people who are looking at the landscape and saying, well, Ross only has one recommendation. We do that because we think it's easier for applicants, but they're saying, every other school's getting two. Maybe Ross wants two as well, or
we don't want to.
Yeah, or what about an alum? What if a Michigan alum? How do we accept those, or how do we feel about it?
Here's the thing: we value insights from people who know you very well. If you haven't worked closely with a Ross alum, then it doesn't really help us that much. That said, a lot of alums and students feel compelled to drop us a note, and we always welcome their notes about different candidates. But I wouldn't go out seeking one, because if they don't know you well, it's really not going to help you in the process.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll mention is it doesn't have an outsized impact either. So if you don't know an alum, we're not using that as a major point in your evaluation process. So it's probably not worth the effort in many cases.
Awesome. I just wanted to clarify because I know it comes up a lot. I will say there are also, I think, a lot of questions about how to choose a recommender, or if you recently switched jobs or you're not comfortable asking your supervisor. We get that. It is absolutely okay to pick a former supervisor in our case. I will say, since we have one recommendation, there's probably a real emphasis on having it be some sort of supervisor from some point in your work history.
The more recent, the better.
And exactly. The more recent, the better. I wouldn't, if you're going to pick a former supervisor, I might avoid picking the one of your job, first job out of undergrad, because that kind of gives us a little bit of pause wondering why you chose somebody from so long ago. And also, when I read those recommendations, the insights aren't as great. They tend to be more, you're a really positive person who showed up to work every day on time and were enthusiastic. That's great, but that's not quite the insight we're looking for. So when in doubt, I would really choose the person who knows you best, but knows also your current work product as close as we can to that, what that looks like, and can really speak to that in detail. I think that's a good reasoning, when in doubt.
If you haven't asked them by now, I'd ask them this week, because you're running out of time.
It's true. What else haven't we covered? I know there's a lot. One thing I've seen coming in quite a bit, by the way, is cafe chats aren't up quite yet. Our current students are still thinking about finals and finalizing their travel plans over the break, but sometime, usually about mid-December, we'll post all of their availability as they're around the world throughout end of December and early January as well. So I'll keep an eye out for that, and just keep an eye out on our website. And also, Sujan will typically mention when those are available if you follow her blog. And I'll just plug, Sujan's blog is an awesome way to follow updates about the Ross process and keep up to date. It's a good way to know when interview invitations are coming out. Pro tip, interview spots on campus fill up very quickly. So if you kind of want a heads up when those are coming, the best way to figure those out is the blog. One thing I know we didn't touch on, we kind of skimmed over, is the IR section in the AWA of the GMAT and how we evaluate those. This is tricky at times because it's not as cut and dry as the other section. To be honest, the IR and the AWA are not part of the rankings that are used when we report GMAT scores. So naturally, they're probably not quite as important. But what I would say is I would not ignore those sections. The admissions committee is paying really, really close attention to all parts of the exam, and outlier scores, particularly those that are really low, or we've seen people who actually don't even do the writing section, that doesn't give us very much confidence. And that's something that's very alarming to us. So I definitely would pay attention to those sections, and maybe they're not as important, but they're definitely something that we'll take a close look at.
And it could differentiate you too. All things being similar or almost equal, we'll take the candidate with the higher IR score. So you may be at the same score as somebody else, very similar work experience. If your IR score is much lower than the next candidate, that could change the outcome as well.
So I see a question here about work experience. Either you have just a little bit of work experience or you have multiple years of work experience. How can someone on either end position themselves well in the application process?
Yeah, I mean, I think largely speaking, it's similar to the GMAT score in a way. We're not just saying this. There's no absolute minimum, and in most cases, there really isn't totally a maximum either. We've had some much older students, either of military service or who are looking to make a really big career switch, and that's okay. I think those who are on the younger side of the spectrum and with less work experience, you really need to tell us a compelling story about your work experience thus far and convince us that you are able to contribute to class discussion just as much as somebody who's had, a bunch more promotions or maybe has a larger scope to their work. So you would really want to highlight those work stories even more and be particularly prepared to show us, how you're ready to contribute to class discussion, your career path, and those things. The flip side of that, I think when you have maybe 8 to 10 years of experience or on the higher side, you really need to have a compelling story around why an MBA and why now. Because, it's a little less clear for us, if an MBA is really the right timing or how it's going to impact your career. And so I'd really put some thought in your career essay and showing us how that fits in your career plans. Are you making a really big career pivot and what that looks like? I think that's an important thing we consider.
Yeah. And I think even if you're on the lower side, that why now is something that we're looking at too. In some cases, it does make sense to do the MBA a little bit earlier. So I would say that if you're brief, that's a good place to mention that could be in the optional essay as well. So that's kind of how we feel about work experience.
I mean, the thing is, you want to get a job after business school. We want you to get a job after business school. If companies want people with experience, we're going to admit people with experience. There's no minimum, but companies are looking for MBA grads from Ross who will bring something to the table, experience from another industry. It can be a really big career change. We have people who've been in the Peace Corps and Teach for America. They've been doctors, lawyers. If they want to change careers and go into a different industry, you're going to have valuable experience to bear, but you have to understand how that's going to translate into a career change.
Awesome. We have time for maybe one or two more. One quick hitter I'll mention that I just saw, just to clarify, because I think we talked about it in the very beginning, but we are okay with you submitting pretty much as many test scores as you would like. I think sometimes applicants overthink this and think we'll judge them if it took them a while to get to the right test score, or if they had a really bad exam. We don't really mind multiple takes of it. If anything, I think our whole team sort of looks at it as, hey, that shows persistence. Yeah. You're making an effort. You're taking the test. We know it costs money to take that exam. You've been studying for maybe years. That's persistence, and that's grit. And so don't be shy about that at all, or don't cancel scores because you're worried what we're going to think. That's something we're absolutely okay with.
All right. I think that about wraps it up for today. We are so excited for you to complete your applications, hopefully meet us either here or in one of the 3 cities that we're going to be doing the team exercise in. We wish you all the best. Stay tuned to my blog. You can post questions there, and we'll answer them on our website. So good luck, and go Blue.
Go Blue. Happy Thanksgiving as well.